Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this special episode at the Bulldog Cigar Lounge. It's threatening rain here and there. We just had a little bit of rain, so I felt like doing a show. It's not too late. This room's perfect. If it rains, we'll hear it. It'll be good. Last time I did a show up here, I think it was the one on the vacuum, which sadly was uploaded at 4K, but our friends at YouTube accidentally wouldn't encode it anything above like the most basic 480p. So hopefully this one will encode a lot better. So I've been thinking about sort of, what to discuss. Been really feeling like, sort of addressing the NASA issue. But I'll be really straight with you. I mean, it's after so many episodes on NASA and, we pick it apart, baby. I mean, from the space station to the past launches. I've come at it from so many angles, psychological angles. Psychological languages. Ooh, that's kind of interesting, huh? Yeah, but we, come at it from so many angles that I know we just love shooting the breeze about it. So, at this point, I'm just going to kind of do a NASA odds and ends update from what I'm seeing, because for my money, they've been very quiet lately. They really have been quiet lately. I think they know that Trump is on their ass with Space Force. And so Space Force, we know very little about it. We probably will always know very little about it until we see them do something, because it's all military, which is great. And now we know, hey, when Space Force does something and it's all covert, it's because of Space Force. Now, what are you going to do, NASA? That's what I am dying to see. So, I know that a lot of you think, Trump is on the inside. I would say he is so on the inside that he has failed to ever be a part of their parties or their functions on any level other than someone wanting to shake his hand at one of his own events. But he's the one pushing NASA to go back to the moon. He's pushing him to go to Mars, all because I think he's trying to sucker them into exposing themselves. Now you might think, oh, well, the President of the United States, as soon as you become president, they tell you everything, and therefore they know about all the lies. And I would say that is probably categorically the opposite of what exactly happens. They try to muscle you to do what you're told. If you are a normal citizen like Obama, you're going to just nod your head and feel privileged that you've ever gone from a nobody to a somebody, and now you're in charge of, technically, perception-wise, in charge of the most powerful country in the world. With our successors being close behind. I don't mean to poo-poo anyone else's power structure or abilities. But with Trump, I think it's a completely different game, which is why they never wanted him in there, because they know he would never cow down, right? But NASA, what is there? Where to put my ashtray? What does NASA claim to be the experts at, right? Well, they have had a free pass since the moon missions. And it's not like they've been sitting on their ass. Okay, the space shuttle was invented. It did go up in the air. As illogical as that device was to launch payloads into space, I guess the only thing was that to get payloads unloaded properly, pointed in the right direction, we needed to actually have a vehicle get it to the orbital altitude, and then it gets put into space. Now, by design, it's just an orbit. It's wherever it's going to be. Flat or round, doesn't matter. Whatever's holding up everything else is holding up this object. And then human beings kind of, twisting and turning, making sure a telescope lens goes straight down on us, a weapon, whatever, right? The only thing I have seen NASA involved with in terms of the press recently have been those, doom and gloom articles they buy to keep their budget going, right? To manipulate the population into completely supporting them. Now, what's interesting about NASA is that the citizens of the United States never, ever vote for NASA's budget. It isn't that interesting. It's not like a weird line item somewhere where, we're paying for duplicitous bureaucracy like Trump getting rid of the agency that was trying to block poachers bringing back ivory from Africa, because now Africa has those layers of protection, and now we have moved that responsibility from that dedicated agency into customs. So customs has been given, billions and billions of dollars to upgrade their game. So it's duplicitous. You don't need both functions. And so, of course, the left took that and ran with it. Oh, Trump wants to kill a bunch of big game animals. And it's like, fuck, I hope you rot in hell for making all these goddamn, false assertions. But with NASA, a $60 million a day budget should be something that the American people vote on. We should. We should vote on all budget measures over a particular threshold of cash. And I would think, quite frankly, anything that's grabbing $1 billion a year or more should have to be voted on. And those organizations should have to make presentations with accountability to gain our support. Now, what would that do? What would the difference be if we were able to vote on these things? Well, the big one would be those organizations couldn't remain clandestine, secret. JPL wouldn't be able to say, well, fuck you. I don't have to tell you anything about what I'm doing. I don't have to prove anything that I'm claiming. You're just going to pay for my shit and, go back to your bridge game or whatever it is, right? What a 70s reference that was. And what's interesting about it, if you think that's absurd, the funny kind of non-absurdity of it is that how do you run a corporation? How do you run a corporation? How would you run any institution whatsoever? I was talking to my friend who's running for the Senate, and I was telling her, analogies are extremely powerful because it gets everyone to kind of go, oh yeah, that's bullshit. And the analogy I gave her, because she's going to be, having a position on border control, because everybody has to have a position. But I said, what organization in the world is run like the United States southern border? What organization runs like that? Full fucking chaos, man. You got human trafficking. You got people saying, good Mexican citizens just want to come over here and work and start a new life. And these coyotes give them big old kilos of cocaine or whatever. And they're running across, and the Border Patrol can kill them after they're given their warning. These people don't know. They don't even know that that's a consequence half the time, right? Because they come from deep, deep in the South where, you realize there's some people in Mexico that have never seen a car. There are locations like that, right? One of my buddies, like I said, watched a woman get hit by one, and they just could tell right off the bat she'd never seen one. She didn't know to get out of the way of it, right? Because she sat there watching him go by and was like just startled. Anyway, but yeah, this situation where after a person comes across the border, you have just this random number of people that come across the border, random number of services that are given to them. Healthcare, Social Security, you have a random balance sheet. Well, what is your P&L, your profit and loss sheet? Well, fuck, I don't know. Why? Well, because my loss sheet's complete chaos. Well, the profit, yeah, it's all the other indigenous citizens that fought and died for this country. Unlike those that are coming over, won't fight for their own country. It's just a fucking random crapshoot. So nothing in the world runs like the southern border of America. No organization. I gave her the analogy. I said, why don't you just compare it to a college? Well, if any college and university in the world was run like the southern border of America, it would be random students coming. They'd randomly show up to class. They'd randomly not study or whatever. They get all the free housing and dorm rooms and free lunches and all this other stuff. They don't necessarily have to to graduate. They're disrupting all the other citizens that are trying to actually, get a degree and focus. Oh, and you can kill one of the students, by the way. You can rape one of the students, by the way, and, Democrat will just let you go do it again. Just nuts. So take that little analogy and run it back to NASA. Okay, 60 million a day. What are you doing for that kind of money? Because 60 million a day, that's 600 college degrees a day. If the kid got a $100,000 degree, which is a fairly expensive degree. You can get them for less than that. But a $100,000 degree times 600 is what NASA's consuming on a daily basis. You know, there's all this white privilege horse shit going on, and privilege this and privilege that. NASA's made of all races, by the way. Well, what are we doing? We're just paying for a bunch of privileged people to fuck around with no commitment to the American people or the world as to what the hell they're doing. Hey, don't give me this bullshit. Now you're launching a bunch of secret satellites for these, these black hats. You're not doing that anymore. You know why? SpaceX is going to take care of that. And maybe, or Space Force and then SpaceX will do the launches. Okay. What are you doing now? You don't have a shuttle anymore because you let that thing atrophy so bad that we had 2 of them blow up. So their cover story, to get them a little, it's always some fucking lie. A person who's a liar just keeps lying until they get to the next stage of the scam. Then when they get caught, they pack up their shit and they take it to an area of the world that no one knows is a scam, and they run it again. I just watched a video on YouTube about stolen valor. And this dude was busted by ABC Australia. And what he was doing, he actually came clean on Anderson Cooper's show, which I at least celebrate him for that. His excuse was kind of strange. Said he was mentally ill. False, undiagnosed mentally ill. Maybe he is. I don't know. But what he was doing is he would go to gatherings. He would keep looking in the paper, and he'd set up a tent with a bunch of collections for various military branches, movements, collect a bunch of money, tell people he's going to be at another location, pack up his stuff and change his whole story and go to the next organization, like make up another thing. Okay. So what's NASA doing? Lying about going back to the moon. First, they've never been there. That's the problem. They don't know how to get there. They have no platform to get to the moon. Zero, man. And then they're going to supposedly do one that's 1,000 times more difficult than 1,000,000 times more difficult, which is go to Mars. So we've got a bunch of new listeners. And so I'm getting some questions that I've answered in episodes. So let's just say you haven't gone back to watch those episodes. My position is very clear on Mars because I'm getting Mars questions. I think people understand very quickly I don't believe we went to the moon for a million reasons I've documented. I think we've never been to Mars necessarily. I think that we have taken amazing, perhaps telescope shots of Mars that we haven't seen, which gives them the ability to sort of create a facsimile of it that will sort of maybe be more accurate than anything that we've seen with telescopes of Mars officially without, orbital reconnaissance satellites. But I think the whole thing is a picture game. They launch a rocket out of your sight, right? It goes over the Atlantic Ocean. You don't see it anymore. The fucking thing could be splashing in the ocean 10 minutes later, but they're telling you this fantasy that this thing can suddenly escape the Earth's gravitational force, which is an absolute joke. And, slingshot, which the slingshot theory, I've just, for my own personal intellectual capacity to understand it, it makes no sense physically because you must introduce a constant power source behind a vehicle to achieve every split second of the slingshot theory. You cannot stop the booster as you always see on a SpaceX launch, and they're not saying, well, actually, they do say they're sending stuff out into space. But you have to introduce more power because you have to increase the elliptical orbit of a vehicle to then take advantage of the last second, which is your last orbit, to then slingshot. But you still have to hit a motor to break out of the slingshot orbit. Otherwise, you'll just have a really big orbit around Earth and you'll slam into Earth eventually, right? None of that stuff has ever been prophesized, let alone documented for us. So it's all bullshit. So they never go there. And they send you pictures from Greenland, I mean, I've seen some pictures from the dude who travels all around the world. He traveled in Iran and Iraq, and he was filming these mountainsides. And I'm sitting there going, Jesus, those things look exactly like the Mars shots. Just snap it, put it in Photoshop, knock it down to a rust color, Photoshop any, electrical poles or whatever, modern things out of there, some road or something. And you got Mars. But I also talked to the two guys who worked on Tron. They worked for JPL for 13 years, and they made what? Terrain simulation software for Jet Propulsion Laboratories. When I asked them what for, they didn't really have an answer. Well, just cause, man. I said, well, how good is it? And he goes, the more memory you have, we can do every grain of sand. I was like, done. Like I've said recently, one of the coup de grace to NASA's whole narrative of having all these accomplishments post the moon mission, but even the moon missions with 2001: A Space Odyssey, pretty much pioneering every technique that they needed to use to fake the moon missions, although they did a butcher job. The one reason why Stanley Kubrick wasn't a part of the moon mission landings is that the shots are so shitty, Stanley would have probably cut his own throat had he ever been responsible for those shots. But it's every advancement in special effects in Hollywood coincides with NASA's capabilities. In some cases, NASA goes after special effects groups reveal, but nowadays NASA goes first, and then it is given to this special effects community, or at least they're allowed to make a movie out of it once they kind of used it up, or they got better technology at NASA headquarters. But I'm also getting a lot of pushback on my research with Vivian Kubrick, Stanley's daughter. She was gracious enough to let me become her friend, and we'd have, easily 4-hour conversations. I mean, these aren't like, hey, did your dad fake the moon mission? Absolutely not. Okay, that's all I need to know. Click. It's not like that. It's going deep and deep and deep into it. But here's the thing. And she's allowed me to tell you this. She had a congenital issue that disappeared when she was 9, but they kept monitoring it for 12 and a half years. If I got the numbers right. She was essentially at her father's side virtually every single day of her life for 12 and a half years. On occasion, the schooling was always brought to her. She did go to school every once in a while, way before any moon stuff was even coming close to fruition. But then they finally just, her father was like, you are special. You have this, she did the soundtrack for Full Metal Jacket. It's like, she just did that. I mean, she's a musician, but it's like she didn't make a huge career out of it. But if you go listen to that soundtrack, we got the Fallout franchise copying it every single day. There's some other video games that copy that every day. It's a landmark soundtrack. So this kid's, at the time she was a kid, but she was extremely talented. But if he had gone anywhere in the world to shoot anything secret, she would have been there because she was at her dad's side. So for all of you who don't want to believe what I've told you about her breaking it down for us, even The Shining, explaining every single piece of it, it's a coincidence. This kind of stuff happens every once in a while. She would have been there. She would tell you. But again, she is an extremely ethical person. And she's on our side, guys. She's completely on our side with all this stuff. She's an activist every day. She's trying to get Julian Assange in a safe place, before it's too late, But she thinks for herself, and she's very skeptical, and she helps me be skeptical. As sure as I am about certain things, she'll put her little intellectual wedge in there and get me to kind of pull back a little bit on some things, But yeah, this organization that is milking us dry. So I was at a function a few weeks ago, and I met a gentleman who works for SpaceX. What's his job? Special effects. Okay. Now, most of us on the show just went, Ha 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 ha. Isn't that hilarious, right? Now, what's funny about it is he's a very intelligent guy. He started, I didn't want to say anything, you know. He started down the track of people, he was laughing at us without knowing it when I'm standing next to him, that people don't think they sent the rover into space. The shot of the laboratory with the green screens behind the launch, the Falcon 9 tip where they put the car. He was told that that was photoshopped in, but he didn't work for them back in those days. So he's like chastising these people to me, all those people that thought that, you know, the green screens weren't there. Kid, are you just toting some bullshit or what, you know? He then mentions the space station for a split second, which I thought was hilarious. So I'm sitting there kind of listening. You know, it's not going to be an event where I'm going to be, you know, getting into some deep conversation. But I looked at him after he said that, and of course, I got some friends with me that know all about all this stuff, and they're looking at me like, "You going to do this?" I'm like, "Nah." So he mentions the space station. Oh no, he's mentioning the fact that we had correctly observed that there were no stars in the rover shots as well. Again, yes, if you adjust an aperture for bright light, you will probably lose most of the stars. Not serious, but you'd lose most of the stars. But you wouldn't probably lose the Milky Way, but you'd lose most of the stars. He hasn't thought this thing through. He's defending his paradigm of existence. And he was talking to like somebody else, and he didn't think that I was going to be anything against what he was saying. And so he goes, "Well, you know, do you even understand how cameras work?" He's talking like third party to someone else. And I said, "Well, isn't it interesting that the space station was built with no window pointing towards space?" And he was like, "Oh, that's true. You can crack these people in half. I mean, you just got to be gentle with them, because then they feel like you're combating them. They double down into bullshit. And that's where you get into these conversations, which match so many topics, don't they? Now, unless you guys could tell me different, you know, at this particular location right here, we watch YouTube like crazy. We watch tons of conspiracy stuff, especially. We watch other normal, ridiculous things too. Lots of Jap anime too. Like the good stuff. But if there was some significant new evidence against NASA, we would be watching it and everyone's review of it. What's interesting is that NASA has seemingly pulled back on a lot of these live broadcasts from the space station. A lot of this footage they keep screwing up with people, you know, flying by on harnesses in the background, a bunch of obvious, you know, blue screen stuff where people aren't really either in the same room together, or they're grabbing on wires on each other as the guy tries to do a forward flip, you know, faking that he's in zero gravity. So there has been a change. And what was interesting is probably, I think the last time I saw a major surge in videos that were tearing this up, you know, Jaronism and a bunch of other folks, was about a year ago. And, you know, Vivian and I look at this stuff too, and, you know, she'll look at it in her location. She'll be like, "Man, this really seems real, doesn't it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, man." Like some of the fly-throughs of the tubes are incredible. It's a solid, you know, it's a shot that doesn't turn off. And the vomit rocket theory is that you get a 60-second fall from a vomit rocket at pretty much the maximum. Now, let's say that they could maybe give you another 30 seconds. They go up extra, extra high and then dump it. Some of these shots go forever. And the woman with the crazy hairdo, right? The hairdo that would fly off of her head and short circuit a bunch of electronics in the room, right? You could not possibly, well, you can't convince me, let's just put it that way, that one, anyone can wear anything they bring up in a duffel bag. I think that is complete horseshit. You need a uniform. You need a uniform that is static proof. You know, like the little wristbands when you modify electronics, right? You need a static proof, static guard suit on, because you could easily You're in space, man. If they're truly 200 miles up, roughly, right? You're talking about you're 20% towards the Van Allen belts, which are made of pure electrons. Okay. Plus, you got massive radiation up there. You do. Flying from Los Angeles to Denver, Colorado is a chest x-ray. Okay. So this is radiology people telling me this stuff. Okay. All right. What do you think spending a year up there or 6 months up there? You're completely outside of all the protective layers besides the Van Allen belts themselves. But now you're starting to get chewed up by the Van Allen belts. Well, if you could wear a suit that's got a Faraday cage built into the fabric, then at least you could keep a lot of the, electrons in the outside of your body. Might even be sound to get some headgear. The whole thing is a Faraday thing. It doesn't have to be that thick. It just has to be a Faraday cage. And remember, Faraday's effect is that when you have a wave of electron / plasma / electricity / ether coming at a surface texture, if you have a grid of wire, the effect is if the frequency of the electricity coming at you is unified, meaning it's not changing its frequency drastically, meaning it would be like, your radio going from 88 to 106 to 88 to 106. As long as that's not occurring, as long as it's 106, which has a vibration, it will maintain its external path on a Faraday cage, which is like chicken wire, Again, I saw a dude when I was a kid. I first moved to Boston. I went to the Boston Science Museum, and there was a demonstration of a guy with I think it was 1,000,000 volts. It wasn't that, it was higher. But he put his arm on the inside of that cage, and man, a big Tesla coil goes wham and just literally hits right where his arm is, and he didn't die. I'm pretty sure it was his bare forearms too. So that's how powerful that is. But anyway, this chick with this big long hairdo, they all just can do whatever the fuck they want up there in that space station. It's like, yours truly is vacuuming up hair. It's everywhere in my house, man. And I don't know, I don't shed that much. But come on. You realize if you lose one hair and you have short hair, you don't even see it. It's this little tiny fiber. It's, size of your carpet fiber, whatever. When you lose a hair that's 2 feet long, just one, your little drain at the end of a shower could look like it's got a big clump of hair. It's like 4 hairs because they're so long. Four times 2 is, 8 feet of hair, right? So you can't just have someone running around. I don't buy that crap at all. And you can't just bring, a big sweater. Well, have any of you messed around in wintertime when you walk across a carpet and you touch the doorknob and literally you feel pain in the fingertips because it just blew up about 4 capillaries as you got shocked? How could you wear clothing that is completely staticky? How many of you have a blanket at night that's made of some similar type of material, synthetic or organic, doesn't matter, and it's real dark at night and you move the blankets and you see the little tiny shocks, sparks of light in your blanket? Okay, so you're up in space, 200 miles. Let's see. How important is it not to create anomalies of very avoidable stuff by simply wearing a uniform? What's funny is the shows on Netflix that have Expanse, and for instance, and all those space shows, minus maybe Alien. One of the guys, most people kind of wore an overall in Alien, the movie. Everyone's wearing uniforms. It's like Hollywood gets it. A writer gets it. Anyone who does any research goes, well, yeah, they're obviously wearing uniforms. The astronauts, whether they did what you think they did or did what I think they did, they wear those little skull caps, right? So it's just their face was exposed. That makes sense. Even those dudes had really short hair, especially if you had a huge do like mine, you're not going to want to fly around. Because the other thing too is hair loose in a zero gravity situation. I mentioned this a long time ago, made a bunch of you laugh. Imagine you're a guy with short hair and you're talking to your buddy in zero gravity, and all of a sudden you take a deep breath. And now you're sucking that brunette's hair down your throat because it's just floating in space because she won't put her dew up. Cafeterias, restaurants, you can't cook food with long hair. You got to put it in a bun because it falls into food. That can create some pretty bad circumstances, right? Again, give me a break. So how it could be completely fake and some of these shots are created, I will say, I kept thinking about it, how the harnesses could work for this woman's incredible tour through the space station, and she's changing tubes, she's changing complete directions. And, you know, again, the place is a shithole inside. That's the other thing that you just can't wrap your mind around. My buddies in effects, special effects, especially space effects, they just look at that and they just cringe. They're like, how could it be so messy constantly? This, again, is a multi-billion-dollar circumstance. And again, during some sort of major event, you can't have, like, she went to this one escape hatch and it was covered in bags of crap. I mean, not physical feces, but just stuff, you know, all stacked up against the door. Really? So if you need to get the hell out of this place in a hurry, help me, guys. We got 20 minutes to get this thing. We got 4 seconds before we're going to die. Poof, everybody's dead. So the thing is not remotely architected like a real space station would be architected, you know? Again, us reverse engineering their concepts from a layman standpoint, when our most basic implementation of these structures differs by almost 95% of what you see up there, you got to start asking some questions, right? But the other big one too is, you know, why did this space, well, we have no footage of the space station ever being built. That might have, you know, been a real interesting thing. You know, if we built the pyramids today, don't you think we'd take a picture? You know, I will say that the sheer lack of photographs of satellites, besides some of the studio work that was the Hubble telescope fiasco, it really does start to make you think, you know, is any of this shit real? I mean, is it real? Yeah, not that it's not possible, but what I sort of think, because I've seen military satellite designs with my own two eyes, I'm starting to think the military ones are real, and the pedestrian ones that steal the money from us to pay for those clandestine ones is maybe the scam. And so you can't take a picture of something that doesn't exist, but you're not allowed to take a picture of the military ones. So what the hell's going on? You know, I don't know. But I would like to have, and it's what's nuts is what I'm about to ask is sort of like a grade school student request. And yet what I'm asking is obviously out of the question, because it's not happening, which is, hey, NASA, we need a website that clearly outlines the day-to-day objectives of all of your departments. You can throw it in an Agile, you could throw it in a Camden format, doesn't matter. I need to know, what's that building do? What's that building do? What's that guy do? What's that girl do? What was that launch all about? I mean, I need to know. We paid for it. We paid for it so you could play around and have some fun. Where's it going? What's it doing? Why do your cameras ever turn off if it's not covert? You know, I've said it several times, and I want to remind you, for anyone who especially believes we're actually going to Mars, I mean, the next two things I'm going to tell you should be painfully obvious in the 21st century. We should have 4K footage from Earth, the launch, looking down at the pad, Cape Canaveral, Florida, launch, orbit, slingshot, and then the whole trip to the moon and the whole trip to Mars. It never shuts off. It points back at Earth to the best of its ability. You can have 4 or 5 of these cameras. Look at a GoPro, right? That's a consumer camera that can shoot 4K. Now you might be thinking, oh, but you know, they don't have enough memory. And Screw that. What it is, because again, they're telling you they can get, 4K, if not 16K composite shots from the surface of Mars. So our transmission protocol is flawless, man. They've not only got the pixel data, they've got the color table. They have everything. They have compositing capabilities. So you don't have to actually store all the images on the vehicle. You simply have a buffer that saves it with another device transmitting it to Earth. And as we tell the device in a return transmission, got it, it just dumps it out of memory. And then we go on to the next thing. And that device could be easily reused once it lands to be the storage device for other photography from a rover or something, right? Now, why don't they do that? Why hasn't that ever occurred? Well, one, our trips to the moon don't happen very often, do they? You can't go to the moon, probably for a million reasons, but you can't go even if you could, because none of our crap's up there from 1969 to 1972. The Chinese rovers don't exist up there. They don't exist. All that shit was filmed in their backyard. The Israeli probe, which crashed, and then it showed photographs, and then it went offline. Hilarious, right? No one wants to commit they can't get there. And now, is India going to go there again, or go there at some point? It's for sale. The whole platform's for sale now, as I did in my NASA for sale episode. But the reason they can't do this is that even though special effects are great, they still can't simulate believably the entire journey from start to finish. Special effects people have all kinds of methods to reverse engineer images and look at them and go, oh, you did this in Maya. Oh, you did this in Lightwave. Oh, you're doing this in some proprietary thing, but I can see the way you've done your ray tracing. I can see anomalies in the way that light's trying to imitate a star. And when I zoom up on the pixel and I see its wiggle, that's an algorithmic problem that we're trying to solve such that that algorithmic, anomaly goes away. So they can't do it, and they won't try. Oh, I'm sure they're trying behind the scenes, but it just baffles my mind of, well, I'll tell you this much. If paying for this kind of stuff where you had literally a hidden agenda, an agenda that can be forged extremely easy comparatively to the money being spent, right? Billions of dollars. Hollywood could knock it out for way less. But now think about how, well, if you don't know, I don't know how many people have dealt with making films or starting businesses to borrow money to go on these ventures. It's very difficult to find that kind of cash. But since we were actually building a military organization to perfect missile technology and not go to the moon, that's what we were doing. We wanted intercontinental ballistic missiles. We wanted them faster, better, cheaper, smaller. We wanted multiple warheads, which we got by the late 70s. That's what we were going for. And that's what we got for our money. So the government was just willing to underwrite it in 2 seconds because it was a matter of national security, especially after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Again, Russia probably just delivered a bunch of sewer pipes painted white and said that they were missiles. But no one's going to complain in the State Department in America because that catalyzed the next form of our rocketeering. Now, Russia, they know rockets really, really well. They're extremely good at building the engines, building the fuselages. It's great. What is it? Britain, I don't believe has any space agency whatsoever. They just contribute to other people's space agencies. France has had a few private companies for, almost 40 years now, if not more, where they've kind of created what is now SpaceX. And what I mean by that is that, if you look at all the French rockets that have been going since the late 80s and look at SpaceX's entire platform lineup, it's essentially the same stuff. It's the same shape of the rocket, man. So obviously there have been advancements here and there. There's probably been, for SpaceX, I'm assuming, and this is just a pure assumption, no facts whatsoever, but since they have a fairly spotless record after their, initial crashes and stuff, initial explosions. Maybe they got a little bit of covert help from the US government, someone saying, oh, go over there, tell them how to fucking make a rocket. Yes, sir. SpaceX as a whole, I have nothing against whatsoever. In fact, I think it's a great company concept. The rover thing, give me a break. I mean, again, if you're late to the game on that one, man, you've got all kinds of problems with that concept. One, the tires that are inflated would immediately explode. And because of NASA's own claims about the moon missions, just to refresh your memory, things in shadows were the highest I've ever heard, or the lowest I've ever heard, is negative 280 in the shadow, positive 280 Fahrenheit in the light. And this was a big deal about the spacesuits, which are total shit, right? But okay, so you got a dashboard in your car at your house, right? Let's say you live in a climate where it gets really hot and you've seen the dashboard split over the first 10 years you own a car. Why? Well, because it got to maybe 130 inside the car when you weren't there. Maybe, if you're in Vegas. Well, that rover has a dashboard where it has direct sunlight and then direct shadow, all in one piece of plastic. Well, go ask somebody in plastics, because I've got a family member that's an expert in plastics manufacturing. I've sat down for hours having conversations about why he makes so much money. And why does he make so much money? Because he is a mathematician for the way that plastic, when it cools, torques and turns based on its width and diameter and the type of plastic he's using, such that the mold is actually super distorted. And then when it dries, it folds to the perfect position. So you cannot have that rover where half the crap in the dashboard in any one rotating second is 280 degrees. Remember, you can light a match with 320. And then all of a sudden it's an ice cube. It's going to crack. It's going to pop. It's going to explode. The thing's going to... It would have been a cool thing. What if he just said, look, this car's going to explode as soon as we send it to space. It's going to be awesome. And then they do it for real, instead of faking it in some, studio. And until I see those boosters retro land back down with my own two eyes, I will never believe those things are real. The first 2 or 3 shots look like Hollywood crane shots because the tip of the rockets were never in the shot, right? So if you're looking on YouTube, it's like, my hand's out of shot. Well, that's where the crane's attached. And then the kickstands down below, when they landed, bounced really heavily. And they bounced in a non-logical manner as to a landing, at least for my eyes. I've only seen one video clip supposedly of a SpaceX employee filming this from a fairly far away distance, but that makes special effects even easier. All right. If you need to CG a human being walking in the desert, but you're going to keep them, about 1/100th of the size of the screen, well, you're really only moving a few pixels. It's no big deal. But if you got to film it really close, see the, bloodshot eyes, then you better have the best CG team in the world to pull that off, right? So NASA still remains permanently suspect in my eyes. And what I need to research, I guess you could say, is this sort of relationship, because the Jack Parsons JPL laboratories, but look up Jack Parsons. The reason why I always make that joke is Jack Parsons was into some really weird shit. He was a really strange guy, and he founded what has now been renamed as Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So you have, I don't know, I think he's hanging out with Aleister Crowley and the Scientology dude, L. Ron Hubbard, with Oppenheimer. I mean, these guys were all in this weird little clique together in Pasadena. It's just strange, maybe there's nothing to it, but that existed prior, in my memory, to NASA's formal, creation. Okay. Now, here's the other thing, because we are getting a few web pages on this. But again, what I always like to do to validate something I'm seeing that's being claimed that's making outrageous claims, which NASA is nothing but pure, unadulterated, outrageous claims. and we have picked apart their stuff. I mean, we have astronauts, NOTS, on the space station that are in blue screen. We know it for an absolute fact. We've got a guy, several people flipping in this front rotation to prove they're in zero gravity. The guy grabbing a wire in his clothing, does one of these pull things. It's a standard Hollywood prop, man. We've got another scene where two guys were sitting there talking, and a T-tube in the background. A guy goes by on a harness, on a black harness. We have a woman that was rotating a stuffed animal. She keeps rotating it, and then all of a sudden it hits the tension of the wire and it starts to flip backwards, and she grabs it, then looks off screen and makes a face like, uh-oh, she wasn't talking. The guy next to her was talking, so she kind of figured nobody noticed, but everybody noticed. We got a guy pulling himself down a pipe, and then because he's in zero G, he grabs the door jamb of another adjacent pipe, goes through the pipe, and the guy turns transparent as he goes through the pipe because it's a CG composite, right? But think about it. We as citizens, let's just say, one of two scenarios has occurred. NASA's outed as being a completely fake organization, and a ton of people go to jail. All their pensions are canceled. Canceled. We're not going to put you in jail. You were just stupid working for this place as on an intellectual discernment level, but you don't get pension for a fake job. So see you later. Enjoy life. You're smart. Go become a professor somewhere. We know you'll take care of yourself. Okay. But here's your scarlet letter. We're going to tattoo on your forehead. Hoaxster, right? So either that happens, or we go back to, Project Looking Glass, and we undo the formation of NASA. No claim of going to the moon, no claim of a space station, and it's going to happen on our watch. And we've also reset time such that all the bad people went away or never existed. Okay, so now we clean the slate. Now we have to create NASA. We're not going to call it that. We'll call it Space Force. But now we are going to go to the moon if we can. We got to start doing all the experiments that they were doing. We have to create different agencies to handle different areas, right? We want the Rocketeers to be ingenious with rocketeering. Just figure out how to do basic rocketeering, and then we'll tell you what sort of payload we're going to have to push up at a later time once we figure out how much all the payload stuff is going to actually weigh, what we're going to need. Okay. So we start building facilities to figure out environmental control systems. Again, for instance, the spacesuits that went to the moon are a complete hogwash because of the temperature issue. You can't have a backpack that will supply you with the amount of oxygen that those astronauts had. Again, a diver tube, the biggest diver tube you can buy as a scuba diver or a deep sea diver, will last an amateur 1 hour and a professional 2 hours. Because of the disciplined breathing changes the duration. And you can put 2 on your back, so you can get 2 hours or 4 hours, depending on how you're up there. Well, they're up on the moon for a day at one point. Okay. I mean, on the moon, which means the capsule's got to have a bunch of oxygen and all the suits have to have a bunch of oxygen. Well, they never resolved that issue. The other issue is the temperature thing. When they put those crappy spacesuits in the desert of California here, it was 160 degrees inside the suit. The NASA astronauts passed out, and that was the last test ever conducted in a real environment. Okay, so we proved they didn't work, and then we just never visited it again. Sounds like the clinical testing for aspartame. So we would have to actually do it. We actually have to figure this whole thing out. How do we deliver just the sheer supplies to be in space that long? You know, it's a few days there, and then you have to do some sort of orbital, rendezvous with this moon object. You're going to have to figure out how to slow your descent down. Again, one of the first video games ever created in 1969 or 68 was this Lunar lander game. And it was actually text when it first came out. And you simply typed in the amount of fuel you wanted to spend per second, and it kept, reducing the landing speed. What they didn't really tell you until they made the actual video game with a picture of the lunar lander is that you actually need to turn the lander in the direction you're traveling as you're going in orbit still, because you're hauling ass, right? You're hauling ass. You're going, maybe 17 to 30,000 miles an hour, depending on what kind of engine configuration you're using. Let's just go to 15,000 miles an hour. 15,000 miles an hour, people. Think about it. A bullet comes out of a gun around, 1,200? Okay. So you're going to slow that vehicle down. And being in a slingshot orbit around the moon doesn't slow you down necessarily. In fact, it might even speed you up. I don't know. But you're going to have to slow down that horizontal movement. Otherwise, when you hit the surface of the moon, you're going to be pate. You're going to need a lot of fuel to do that. And what's your engine going to be pushing off of? That's the other thing. We're not sure that these conal engines actually work in space, because what are you pushing off of? You're pushing off yourself. It's like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, right? It's a joke. You can't do it. You can't lift yourself off the ground by yanking on your shoelaces. Same sort of theory in space. If you have nothing to push off of, would it go anywhere? Case in point, we put rocket engines pointed at the ground. Those engines are hitting the ground and then gives it lift. And then it's also hitting atmosphere, really thick atmosphere. All right. So we're going to have to solve every single one of these issues. It's going to take a long, long time. And just because JFK said, well, let's do it in 10 years, that means nothing. Nothing. It's going to take however long it takes to get it done, which is why we know we didn't go to the moon. And yeah, Buzz Aldrin would probably punch you in the face if you told him again that we went, or didn't go, excuse me. Imagine being like a Buzz. And I've been kind of harping on this a little bit lately in a lot of my episodes, but I want to really slow it down for 1 second here to really get to the psychosis that makes him punch Bart Sibrel in the face. This dude is, going to the moon in his story in 1969, July. Well, they've just killed a bunch of people that decade, right? JFK, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and JFK's brother, Robert Kennedy. Just boom. And a whole bunch of other people that got shot in the gut. And, it was the name of the game. You fuck with us, we're going to kill you. So when they pull these 3 astronauts aside and tell them, look, I don't think we need to tell you 33-degree Masons what we're willing to do to you if you fuck around with the truth here. You're gone. Now, the stupid thing is, had they just done a press conference together and said, we were forced to say we went, we didn't go, no one could kill them, really, because they'd say, and they're going to kill us. That's what they say. So we need your help. Keep us safe. The CIA is going to kill us, or whoever's doing it. They probably would have been okay. But I think they got addicted to one little caveat. Not just the fame. People will be like, oh, they're famous. I'm sure that doesn't hurt, but taking fame for a fraudulent act probably has the opposite feeling on anyone that's got any decent morals. And just because they helped commit this crime doesn't mean they were all bastards before they decided to do that, nor bastards after they conceded what I'm about to say. So they definitely know, beyond the shadow of a doubt, they could be murdered. And you better believe the surveillance on them must have been insane for the first several years, right? But they see the ticker tape parades and they see the inspiration, which is why Buzz, when he told that little girl, and they're trying to say that, I read Snopes bullshit on it, right? Snopes is like the biggest lying organization on planet Earth, funded by George Soros, guy who's pretty unsavory in his own right. But, this little girl, 8-year-old girl, asks him, why haven't we ever gone back in 50 years? And, which will happen in 2 years, will be the 50-year anniversary of not going back. And then he says, we didn't. And then he proceeds to tell him, but you needed to know that everywhere I went in the world where they congratulated us for going to the moon, even in countries that didn't participate, they were still saying, we went to the moon. And that was mankind celebrating this event. And so it was like an invention of a new Jesus. If it's improving everyone's life and inspiring people, do you really want to turn it off? in my opinion, it depends on what your charter is. If your charter is, truth, regardless of how much it hurts, well, then you need to you don't have to be angry or sad or anything, but you need to have the courage to dump it all out, get rid of everything. So he's got a threat, and he has this perceivable reward that society got from his fraudulent act. I just mentioned Buzz because Michael has barely ever been on camera since he did it, and Neil's gone. Neil tried to tell us in his last speech about hidden truths. He definitely wanted to say something, but whatever. I think when you get old, you get passive. You think, whatever, fuck all that. I'm just going to die and hope God understands. The Buzz, for me, was the most revealing in his outburst for Bart Sibrel interviewing him and showing him proof he didn't go. Which, if you haven't seen it, go see A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. I believe you can see it on YouTube. Please go to Sibrel.com, SIBREL.com, and get the video just to support the dude. But and I have an interview in season 3 you should watch with Bart. He said it was one of his best interviews ever, by the way. But now you've built up the psychosis. You've got these two challenging concepts in your brain. They're going to kill me, and look how many people I inspired, which the people who were going to kill me or will kill me have reminded me, look how wonderful this effect has been on society. You've inspired kids to get into science like me by this lie. And so this is how the earth works. Jesus probably never ever existed, but I would even tell you to study the word of Christ, study the Bible, because it's at times, man, it's like the most inspired algorithms of how to treat each other. So I don't really want us to lose the message just because there's a little factual history swap here and there, right? By the way, I had some dude tell me the existence of Christ is the most historically documented thing ever. And it's like documented without a single moment of proof. So those two things don't work together, just so you know. But so Buzz is in his brain, and someone is coming up to him going, I'm gonna force you to reveal this hoax. Buzz is like 90 now, so he would have been 70 or so when Bart got him in that interview. And now he's like, sort of like, hey, I've done more thinking about this than you, Mr. Sibrel. I have had to live in this sort of paradox of evil and good existing in the same consciousness, which is his consciousness, right? And he says, I think his opinion probably in his brain is at a point where he's like, you don't get the right to make me deal with this because I'm dealing with this every single day. Bart is a guy that's like truth, regardless if you like it or not. And that's sort of my attitude as well. Now, me imposing that on another human being, I don't know. I think it would be, I might treat the, the president of NASA, who's long gone now, like that. Like, you know better. You're the one. Or maybe someone in the intelligence agencies that are trying to, threaten these people. That's where you might take an attitude if you had the balls to do it, right? There's that old saying, pick your battles, right? The biggest wisdom about pick your own battles, and I might make an episode on it, who knows, is the cost-benefit analysis of every battle that you could fight on a particular day, on a particular moment of your life. I do tons of episodes, and I hear myself say the wrong word, and I get season and episode intertwined. I've done it recently a lot, and it makes me cringe. Or I'll say the wrong person's name, or I'll say the wrong year by, I'll say 2014 when I meant to say 1984. I don't know why. I got other things in my brain I'm preparing to say to you guys, and I start allowing the words to swap. But I hear friends do the same thing, especially when people downstairs explain conspiracies to someone who's a newcomer. And they're starting to flub things. And so I kind of wait. I'm like, I think that person heard what the first person explaining it was what meant to say. If you say, it's sort of like Pelosi keep calling Trump Bush. That was funny. Now, she's utterly losing her mind, unfortunately for her. But so there's moments where you can be this nitpicker, that kind of thing. And then there's the big ones. Is this affecting society? Agenda 21. It's totally above ground in Europe. They talk about it all the time. They have meetings about it. But over here, it's a conspiracy theory. So I think that the average citizen who doesn't allow themselves or isn't forced to by design of their career to get involved in a situation these astronauts found themselves in, we kind of have to take a step back and say, you know what? If you really concentrate on their issues and like we just did, we might have a definite clue of what it's like to be Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins, Neil Armstrong, and all the other folks. But if you're just an average citizen joining the conversation and like, yeah, fuck those guys, I would say that those individuals haven't spent any time thinking about what it's like to be in this horrible situation. And so we might be able to say they don't have a clue. And so until we have a clue, we got to temper our responses to this whole thing. We got to be a little careful about being, high and mighty or getting on the soapbox, as they might say. We might have done the same exact thing, especially if we came from that era, born long before. And then, those guys were in their late 20s, early 30s, most of them. And, that's older. If I'm talking to like a 15-year-old kid, they might think, oh, but that's an old guy. He should totally know. And it's like, kid, that's not actually that old. It's probably more mature than today for sure. But, the other thing too is to say, look, if you've never ever dealt with that situation in your life, okay, well, we got to pull back now. What if one of you was the president of the United States instantaneously, the president of your particular country overnight, and you've got all these ideas of how to fix your country and then maybe the world or something. But if you've never had that responsibility before, well, you don't know what the job really means. Imagine you're sitting in some throne or some chair or some round table, and then you go, okay, bring me all the problems that are happening right now, and I'll just knock them all out of the park. And one by one, you realize they're all interconnected, and it's like a domino effect. Well, if I help this person, it screws that person. If I help this person, it screws this other party. Shit, what am I going to do? I need to just do this really simple thing, but we don't have enough money to pay people to do it. We have enough money, but we don't have enough resources. It's a rough job. Let's get back to our original thread here, which is the idea that we building this organization from scratch. I don't know if someone said to you, like, this always happens in business. You might have this big idea. And this is a funny thing that happens with kind of newcomers to businesses. You have like a rookie with a really great idea, and then a business person who's done it before, done something, building something from scratch. And they say, they get together at some party, meeting, something, riding an elevator, playing a game of golf, whatever it is. And, the older guy is like, hey, well, what's going on, man? Oh, I got this great idea. Yeah, I heard about this. So tell me what it is. Kid does a great job explaining the business idea. Then the professional says, well, how much would something like that cost? And how long would it take to make it? How many people do you think we're talking about hiring here? Then the kid's like, oh, I don't know. Probably $1 million, Well, I know if I had $1 billion, I could do it. That's where it starts to make a man out of you, right? So if someone were to ask us really early in the game, okay, we've appropriated NASA. They're gone. We've appropriated JPL. We've poached resources for Space Force. So that's going to be fairly above ground and legit. And where it's covert, you understand why it's covert. I still think my episode about replacing NASA, which aired 45 days at least before Trump announced Space Force, was, to my, obviously Space Force was something being planned, but I must have drawn from that DNA because that's exactly what Trump did. But if you want to hear a really good breakdown of replacing NASA and forming this exact organization on a military level, because what I'm talking about is the citizen level, go watch that episode, because I still lean on that fairly heavily in my own mind as the way to do it. But we as a society would have to say, okay, we don't know how long it's going to take. However, if we could have our scientists say, okay, we're going to build a stair-stepped stack of technology, which in the end will become our platform. And if you've ever dealt with programming, and those of you who haven't, I'll tell you, they always draw a diagram of sort of the stages of technology that rely on each other. For instance, the CPU in your computer talks binary. Above that's machine language. Above that is your non-interpreted code, the stuff that you write. But you could have, in that realm, you could be programming in Microsoft C, but then someone gave you a library that handles data communications with the modem, with this and that. And so you stack all these things up, and eventually you have this huge architecture that will give you what you need. We have the same thing. We have the rocket. Inside the rocket, we have the environmental systems. We have all of the science and data technology. We've got technology that allows an astronaut to go outside. They've got the lunar lander that's probably going to have to get down on the surface of the moon. If that isn't capable of getting all the way back to either the space station around Earth, which is probably how we would do it, or all the way back to Earth, and we have to have a separate capsule like they used, the service module, that then it rendezvous with. If we recreated the old format, we wouldn't want to do that unless it was the right thing. But if we can sell and find out, well, I'll put it this way, we do a huge analysis on this whole thing, maybe give ourselves 5 years just to do the analysis. And we say, okay, if we can get rocket technology perfected with a certain payload, but we don't know what's going to go in there, we can at least start shoving things into space if we need to. Get better satellite technology, better pictures of Earth, whatever it is. So we start upselling each stage of the system. Well, the environmental system, which could take a person to the moon and keep them all okay, might be really handy in Antarctica or in some huge desert community. Maybe some spin-off technologies start solving world hunger, start creating water out of nothing, start taking deserts and turning them into lush, farms, on and on and on. So as we build each piece, we're immediately upselling it to the public and making it available to the public. Now, as I said in my Replacing NASA episode, in regards to military technology, it's really funny. So Sid Mead passed, and people went out and looked at a bunch of his lectures. And one of his lectures, and he was very forthcoming about this, he said, he's talking about anti-gravity, and he looks at the audience and he goes, we have anti-gravity. We've had it for a very long time. But that's a different conversation. He goes back into his presentation. So one of the fans went to the Sid Mead page and posted that, YouTube video, and then asked a question with it. He said, does Sid really know about anti-gravity? Like, let me know. Well, I've had this conversation with Sid several times, and he had military people visit him, and in order to impress Sid, they revealed covert technology to him all the time. Now, they don't tell him how it works necessarily. I mean, they'll give him some thumbnails and stuff, but you could put all the thumbnails that was ever told and you still have nothing. Okay, you've got basically a Marvel movie. But for instance, was it the first Iron Man had the Mercury in the tube going in a circle, which has been done way before the Iron Man movie. But the guy actually told Sid once, because Sid was talking about having if you electrify spinning Mercury, that it creates an electromagnetic field around the object that makes it zero gravity. And the guy who last came to Sid, which I don't even know when this was, he just tells me that people come to him. He said, "Oh yeah," he said that was ditched a long time ago in the 90s. He says, "We've got totally easier anti-gravity right now. It's all done." And so Sid was actually telling the truth, that in terms of what he's been told by authorities, this kind of stuff exists. Well, what I said in my Replacing NASA episode on a military level is we have what's called black box technology, which is they might create a black box technology piece. And there's all kinds of cool methodologies of engineering black boxes where if you were to try to take it apart, it self-destructs. Everything that you thought you needed to know will just be gone by the time you open it up. And the funny thing was, when I was a kid, when they first came out with cable scrambling boxes, where they had the cable to your house, but they transmit a show with a scramble. You have this all the time with fights and stuff right at your house. The box on your TV is descrambling under your TV, whatever. Isn't that funny? Everything was on your TV and now it's under your TV. But it's obviously knows the algorithm and it's deciphering it. Well, they would pass around schematics in the early 80s that you could buy all the parts and solder it all together, and you could make your own descrambler box. Well, one of them was this, and I don't know why they did this, but I saw it with my own two eyes. There was a service in Massachusetts that was like HBO. It was called Preview. It just came and went. But the Preview box that you got at your house had a hammer in it that if you were to take the screws off and open up the box, this hammer would slam the PC board, which is a little goofy because you're not really destroying the evidence of what's there. I mean, you could voltage meter every single resistor and capacitor and diode and all that stuff and figure out exactly what was there. You can look at every single one of the chips and eventually deduce where it's from. Now, you didn't have the internet to do all the work for you, but someone in the know would know. And so my dad tried to reverse engineer this box once. Eventually the parts got to be insanely costly to do it by hand. But anyway, today it's not an issue. And so the military could, maybe under major observation for launches and things, they could make a black box that's anti-gravity up to a certain magnitude. You need a certain power supply, which is another black box of 0-point energy. It feeds into the antimatter engine of a certain capability. And boom, you don't have rockets anymore. You got ships that simply take off like everything you've ever seen in a sci-fi movie, like the Millennium Falcon. Well, if we're going to build a private organization, we could build various black box technology, maybe not quite up to, 0-point energy systems or anti-gravity systems, but maybe. The thing you don't want to do is obviously let it get into terrorists' hands and then they're carrying a continent over New York and dropping it, right? So I think there's ways of doing it just with the layman's approach, just saying, look, you don't have to be a scientist to logistically plan out what you would need to get there. You just may not have the total of what something might weigh, its capacity, its volumetric space, right? So you might have something that's like, hey, the way we have to build this thing, it only weighs 10,000 pounds, but it's the size of a house, and there's just no other way we can cram the circuitry any tighter than that. So you get into those kind of arguments as well. I think those exercises are really fun for the brain because you'll find out how smart you really are without having all these massive degrees. And according to NASA, and I have to say with computer technology today, if you can give a computer accurate gravity information, right? And I know a lot of people say, oh, gravity doesn't exist. Well, it doesn't exist the way that they tell you as a pull, but it exists as a push. And for the major listeners, they're rolling their eyes because they've heard that 1,000 times. But if you just say, look, Earth generally pulls this much on mass, we think the moon does that much pull, sun, whatever, what all the variables are, then a computer could, I think, very easily find all the algorithms, especially a quantum computer, when those things start functioning. Oh my God. It's almost like the deep thoughts is like a 2-second little thing. Bing. Oh, here's the answer to, life, the universe, and everything. So I think that we have a lot of assistance now that they didn't have in the 60s. And so if we can start building these components for real, and the other thing is that we don't know how much stuff we've actually already invented. There may be a lot of scientists out there that are looking at solutions going, geez, isn't this great? Wouldn't it be nice if we could use this technology? And someone, new kid in the room is like, well, why can't we? And they're like, well, because the world doesn't know this exists. And if we debut this technology as a solution, just like the Orion project, then they will know that we never had it in the first place. And therefore, we didn't do the things that we said we did in the past. The only thing we could do is release this new technology as an improvement over the previous technology. But then we can't explain how it works, because the second we explain how our thing works, they'll find out that's the only way this could possibly have ever worked. And then we're back to where we started. We're a bunch of liars. And it's really unfortunate for brilliant people that are working for these organizations, because they've been sold a bill of goods. They have to believe it because it gives them all the Chotskys in life, right? I work for NASA. I work for SpaceX. I'm this, I'm that. Not realizing they're really forging themselves as aiding and abettors of liars. It's really, really sad. Now, there's definitely active personnel, both organizations, that know they're engaging in fraud. Totally. But just like all infections and agencies where they become very black and very dark, it's usually a tiny sliver at the top, a tiny sliver of covert employees that fake it out for all the other employees, and then they can stay ignorant and blissful and think that they're finding the Higgs boson particle when they're actually doing nothing but looking at a computer screen, giving them feedback data that someone just programmed the night before. And that's actually a point I want you guys to go away with from this conversation, which is any scientific, any outrageous scientific discovery, meaning they're claiming something outrageous, but they can't prove it to you. They just trust me, right? Where they deduced that they had the indication of the scientific result by looking at a computer monitor, giving them numbers, giving them a graph. That is the grade A species of a scam that's being played on those that are looking at the monitor. And so again, the results from any Hadron Collider result could be completely fake. Could be real, could be fake. Could be one of the experiments, could be real, and the other experiment needs to be fake. It's so easy, technically speaking, to create these frauds and the people that work for these organizations in such a powerful way that they would pass a lie detector test. When I first had that epiphany many, many years ago making this show, that yeah, you could take everyone from like command central or ground control, as David Bowie would call it, and say, did we go to the moon? Here's a lie detector test. It's all going to be green for all these employees. But now if we started to say, do you have personal proof that man stepped on the moon? I mean, you were there, you saw it happen. Well, then they'd have to answer no, and they'd still be green. But then we start to get to the crux to the problem, which is proof is largely mythical. And just to kind of dial back to previous conversations as we're wrapping up this one, it's often asked to me, does it matter? Does any of this really matter? The moon thing? Hey, it's a long time ago, blah, blah, blah. I think it does, because people need to know we've never done it. So any kid that would be inspired to do it for the very first time, we get that amazing child to grow up to want to do it. More importantly than that, we have to make sure that we don't allow the archetype of lying to steal money be okay. I do Swisher Sweets every once in a while. They're so delicious. What's interesting about this conversation about NASA in general is that, I'm 50 at 2020. Okay. I don't know if we're ever going to see. Well, I don't know if I'm ever going to see us actually go to the moon. I don't know. Will I see a hoax of us going to the moon? Yeah, probably. Will I see a hoax of us going to Mars? Yeah, probably. Would I rather see NASA get shut down and reorganized? Yeah, I would. Again, a lot of brilliant people there that are ready to do the right thing. Probably 98.9% of the people just ready to go, oh, that's horrible. I would have never joined this organization had I known. But I'm a smart person, and let's get to it. And then if we start to do it for real, then I definitely, most likely, will never see it occur because it's going to take a really long time to pull it off, unless, again, some covert stuff happens. Now, somebody forwarded me an article, which was, I can't remember exactly who did it, but it was an article written quite a long time ago saying that we'll never go to the moon because the moon is pure plasma, which I find that entire statement so intriguing. Now, what I think that really meant, I read through the article. I didn't hear anything about how he was explaining that it was plasma. Now, I think at the interior of all celestial bodies is a ball of plasma. And I think I think every single thing other than a meteor, which is very small, has a hollow sphere made of plasma. And that's how the whole universe is connected together. So because we can see the moon has a shadow on it, it can't be made of plasma on the outside because it would be the most blinding light you've ever seen. It would look similar to the sun. So the only thing I could think of that this gentleman was trying to allude to is that it's merely a plasma ball covered with a light, well, thick enough that the plasma doesn't beam through, but light enough that if we landed on it, we might just squish into it like quicksand. Now, how he would have ever deduced this accurately, that's even a more outrageous claim. But the one thing that I mentioned on this show, and I still am yet to see one other YouTube channel ever assert this, and if you've seen it someplace else, I'd love to check the date on it versus my assertion. Do craters exist? Where I suggest that everything on Earth you've ever seen that's been claimed to be a crater is actually a volcanic explosion. And what's super funny about it is you see people that have been raised with this theory. I was raised with that theory that it was a meteorite. Again, for those of you who haven't been into America, in Arizona, we have this massive, what looks like a crater. It's like 3 miles around, 1 mile across, half a mile down. But when I went to, so I've been there like 6 times. I used to travel between here and Kansas, and I always stopped by personally. My family took me there a couple times. But the second you go to Diamond Head in Hawaii, on Oahu Island, it looks exactly the same. It just has foliage around it. Looks exactly the same. I've showed you this, the side-by-side comparisons a million times. And when I started looking at the craters on the moon, they're all perfectly circular. There's no fucking way in hell those things are all circular if it's random rocks from space banging into the moon. Maybe a lot of them might, go and then lose. But it doesn't even make any sense. Orbital things losing their orbit and falling into the moon's gravitational force would still create a Superman scoop out of the ground, right? On the subject that the moon has a plasma interior, I think I personally have cracked it. Which are those pictures that we get from telescopes from normal citizens who have filmed craters that are bubbling in the direct center of the crater, a pure white plasma looking stuff. And it's splashing into the bubble crater that's created by a volcanic eruption from the bottom. It looks like the moon was boiling not too long ago, which is why I absolutely love the theory that the moon is an old sun. And once it burned out, someone just threw another light bulb in, which is why Plato knows about a time before the moon. One of the other listeners just reminded me that even though in one daytime period, you can see the moon on one side of the sky and you can see the sun on the other side of the sky, you don't see them in the same photograph until you have a solar eclipse. And that the fact that these two things are random distances from Earth, but when an eclipse occurs, the moon perfectly eclipses the sun. Now, somebody wrote to me that it only 70% eclipses the sun, and that is complete bullshit. That is complete bullshit. Just do a little bit of research on that, and you'll find that it's not true. But what do they tell us about the moon's orbit? The moon's orbit has an elliptical orbit, meaning not circular, meaning its distance from the Earth varies. Average distance to the moon, it's changed a little bit since I was a kid, but 236 to 237, somewhere in there. Okay. So the sun is a fixed distance from us because we have a circular orbit. Actually, someone said recently it has an elliptical orbit too. So it gets even more messy. If the Earth had an elliptical orbit and the moon has an elliptical orbit, then this solar eclipse working every single time is complete bullshit. Because you have this ball in space called the sun. It's 93 million miles away. And the moon is this random, fucking distance that's much closer, which is a much more profound effect, right? When something's really, really far away, it barely parallaxes when you drive by it. That's why the stars always stay in the same place, even though we're hurling through space. It's because if the story is true of space, okay, I know that a lot of us, I made an episode called Does Space Exist before anybody else? So don't lecture me about space not existing. I'm an OG believer in that possibility. But if it does exist the way that they fable it to exist, then the stars are so far away, they're not going to parallax just because we're hauling ass through space. They won't. Come back in maybe 100,000 years, maybe a few of them moved a little bit. But you can't be, light years away from something and have it parallax. It just doesn't do it. But the fact that this moon is the same size as the sun with these two random distances, I mean, come on. Any of you have taken statistics and probability, I think that the probability that that would be the case would be astronomically against. And to add another little variable to the whole thing, that we always see the same moon surface because it's in some perfect spin ratio such that we only ever see that side of the moon. If it was off by just a tiny, tiny bit, since man has been documenting what the moon looks like, we would have started to see a little bit more of one side and a little bit less of the other side. Nope, it's always the same. Always the same. I think within 100 years, we would start seeing a new pixel on one side of the moon if it was truly this random thing in space, right? So when someone asks me if it matters if we go to the moon, I would say for the flat earthers, it matters just getting into space and seeing the shape of the Earth. Because for everybody who's so sure it's a ball, again, you just ask anyone, well, have you seen it from space? Because that lying organization, NASA, sure as hell ain't your foothold in this whole thing. Their fisheye lens crap during their spacewalks are so sadly fish-eyed, The Mars rover, the SpaceX rover, the Tesla rover in space, that thing wasn't remotely far enough away from Earth to have these huge round ball Earths in the background. Another big faux pas on their part, right? I wouldn't send a man anytime soon, but I would love to see a launch where, again, we got that little camera on the rocket so it never, ever goes out of sight. Remember, this whole dead point in the launch where they say they can't communicate with the rocket because of some anomaly in the atmosphere, that was invented so they could switch the feeds on the video during the hoax. So that's all bullshit. We can keep it on the whole time. Get it to feed it. Hey, even if there's a blackout phase, the camera on the rocket's still going. So the only thing that's going to happen is we'll have a buffer moment where we can't get the data off the rocket down to ground control, which is why the buffer might be, I don't know. I mean, this stick, put it this way, the stick inside this camera is 64 gigs. It can record 2.5, probably 3 hours, and then it's dead, right? It's full. The blackout phase doesn't last 2 hours. So we can get all the footage of the whole journey. We'll see the whole slingshot thing occur. I like to have a picture of the booster and a picture of Earth, a picture of the whole fucking rocket from all different sides so we can monitor it. And then we put that thing on the moon and we figure out how they're doing it. You never lose sight of the thing. Any retro rocket they're doing to slow down the lander from this orbital massive speed to do a nice little plop. I want to see it. I want to see every frame of it. And then I want to give it to, first I want a camera on the moon too, as soon as it launches, because the moon's always in the shot, man. Unless it goes on the backside of Earth. But as soon as we start going towards the moon, because of this magic slingshot theory, I just want to see it just gain more resolution and more resolution and more resolution. Some guy's having a conversation with somebody in his car phone inside the car, and it's super loud, and I can hear the whole conversation. It's pretty funny. So can the whole neighborhood. So, I want to see it. I want to see some rover plop out, automated, drive around, and I want them to land very, very close to the Sea of Tranquility landing of the first moon mission. The goal of the first probe on Mars by the United States of America, with all of this contingency I keep explaining, and we must demand this technology be added to the rocket. It must be built with it, right? Is that we want to drive straight to the lunar kickstand, the lunar module kickstand. I want to see the American flag. I want to see every single footstep, everything. And then we're going to go to the other 5 landings. I want to see it all. I want to see how 2 terrains look exactly the same between 2 different missions. I want to see, what is it? 15, 16, 17 had the moon rover. I want to see 3 separate moon rovers, 3 separate states. That's why QAnon, when he said that we got to the moon, the guy's a big fucking liar, or stupid, or gullible. Pick. One of those is right, for sure. So the savior of the free world can't be a liar, right? Otherwise, we're just exchanging, bad lies for good lies. And that's a big no-no in the pure charter of the awakening. So let me know what you think about all this. Your observations. Just, for those of you who want me to talk more about this kind of stuff, I am paying attention. But again, the data stream from NASA has gone pretty dry. The only thing you can do is wake up every day, go to their website, look at all the crap. It's all the same propaganda. And there's really not a bunch of stuff to talk about. When they forge more footage, it gives us a little bit of tech to talk about. When they give you a new mission briefing about how they're going to put together a new platform, we can look at that. If Buzz Aldrin says something new that's crazy, we can talk about that. Remember, there is a video of him out there, and it's in a Jeranism video. It's embedded somewhere in one of his videos. I can't get the guy to respond to me. Where Buzz said live on television, once we figure out how to go to the moon, it'll be a lot easier to get to Mars. And the people on the other side of that news broadcast said, what? And they got him off the air fairly quick. And supposedly, although I'd never seen this, his people said he was tired. I never saw anyone say that. He just screwed up on TV and told the truth because he's getting old. God bless him. So pending something like that, it is, if you have a new angle you want me to cover, please share it, because I love talking about this stuff. I just don't want to bore the listeners who've already heard it. And I guess, I've been wanting to ask you guys, do you want me to repeat myself? To go through it again, maybe, if I did explain something twice, technically speaking, I'm in an episode 5 years ago, number 26, and then 165 about a year after that. I have definitely told the story, I don't know, 100 times since then to friends and people at this lounge. So I have perfected the way I describe things a lot better, in my opinion. So if that's acceptable to you too, and you want that, just let me know. I'll give you what you want. But if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. It's just a little website that brings this whole thing together, and it offers you every means to get to every episode, plus a search engine, plus a category list. I don't mention that every single time, but that's where, if the show would ever get shut off for any reason, which literally Deep Thoughts Radio not being turned off, the only thing I could imagine would be I don't have enough subscribers to make it worth their while. They have a controversy on their hands. It is on BitChute. So the 2 videos, the channels we have is YouTube and BitChute. BitChute's right up to date. I haven't checked Brighteon to see if I got the 350 views that I needed. I doubt it, but we'll see. Once we get that view count up, I can put another 50 videos up, and I think that'll start making it fairly organic to get the next 1,000 videos. For those of you who dig podcasting, I do apologize. my pipeline looks like this. So I recorded on this camera. Now I got the mic directly to the camera. I have to pull the soundtrack off and run it through Audition to get rid of some noise, to balance the vocals. I tend to lose my volume as the episode goes on. So if you look at it, the initial volume is really high and it trails off, especially if I'm outside. I think I get conscious about, waking up my neighbors at 3 a.m. But I export that, then I clean it all up, and then I put it back into Final Cut. I mix the whole thing down into Final Cut as a video episode, getting rid of all the long pauses, cigar drags, clearing my throat or whatever. And then I publish that to you guys at 4K on YouTube. Then I have to wait for that to fully encode to 1080p. Then I drag that down from YouTube, letting them do all the hard work for me, so I have to recode it at my home. And then I put that on BitChute because BitChute can only handle 1080p. Then I bring it all back into to Audition and balance, just make it mono. And I export that out as a WAV, but the WAV is gigantic. If I have Audition create an MP3, the MP3 is too big. And so then I bring it into Amadeus Pro, and then I balance the levels one more time for podcast so it doesn't blow your eardrums out. And then I let Amadeus Pro make the MP3, which is a very compact MP3, which is what I use for you guys. So that's why the podcast traditionally is much later broadcasts than the YouTube. I'm not trying to get people forced into watching things on YouTube. But if you are interested in seeing these things right when they release, you're going to have to subscribe and click the bell. It works really, really well. So I don't push that stuff like a lot of other channels. And, I'm going to die saying, well, God, if I just pushed that at the very beginning, I would have been able to create probably a sustainable income off this thing. The show, again, it's down to like $35 a month on YouTube because they're just literally ganking the whole show down. I've been pulled out of all the algorithms, and BitChute generates no money whatsoever. The Patreon, I haven't checked it, but it's about the same amount of money. So if you think I'm rolling in it because of the show, you're sadly mistaken. Again, my commitment to you would be, if we can get the show to blow up, if you can pass it all around with your recommendations, and again, strategically, I would say recommend an episode that you think someone of a specific type would want to see, but definitely warn them, hey, it's a variety show, so not every episode will be your cup of tea, but there's hundreds of episodes. So, get onto the website, find the category that you dig, and everything's already in there in the category list. So that should help out quite a bit. The search field's awesome. I just had someone ask me tonight if I would do an episode on JFK's plane crash, which I may do that as an exclusive thing. But if you go to the website and just typed in JFK in the search engine, you would have found the episode that's called Is JFK Still Alive?, which will cover part of the plane accident, but not in exhaustive detail like has been done several times on YouTube. I will say there's a tremendous amount of disinformation associated with that plane crash. So, like I've been told that he had the cast on his foot the day he went on that flight, and then someone else came back and said, no, he had the cast pulled off his foot. So it's like, okay, how do you get that information reliably? There's not a lot of articles saying, well, did you hear today JFK lost his cast on his foot? And that article doesn't exist. So trying to find the facts is real important for us, because we're trying to put the best foot forward. Anyway, we're on social media as well. So we have a locked Facebook group. We've got Twitter. Twitter's taken off like crazy. The other one is minds.com, which I personally think is absolutely gorgeous. It's a Facebook copy. It's a Facebook copy, but it is First Amendment protected, like BitChute. So it's cool. I have heard a bunch of stuff about how BitChute is not First Amendment protected. There's been some articles and suggestions that that's the case. They've never touched any of my videos, and YouTube has definitely touched my videos, right? Again, on YouTube, they demonetize every video I post. And what it is they're essentially robbing me of the revenue. So, if I'm not doing a NASA episode where it's going to get into a real organic search, then I might get $650 in the first week. Well, they will keep it demonetized for 450 to 550 views, and then they allow it to monetize. Well, by that time, all of you have come through, no ads have ever played, and so all the revenue's gone. The goal of revenue is to generate enough that I can do nothing but the show. So just truly research the crap out of stuff, really put a lot of photographs in. If I had the time, I would do episodes where I would hire somebody else, just like you see in most shows like Joe Rogan or whatever, where someone's pulling up images for everything that I've discussed. And so I can just tell them, hey, just listen to the episode. When I mention something, go find the picture of the Georgia Guidestones, put it on there. If I mentioned JFK, put a nice picture of him there, blah, blah, blah. And we could make much better episodes, but we are several thousand orders away from that occurring. So it probably will never occur before I end the show and maybe create a different show. The other thing is supporting the page. So financially supporting the page. There's one-time PayPal link up there. There is Patreon, which is a monthly subscription. Again, with Patreon, you get in the credits, you get a 20% discount on the store, and you get these episodes given to you literally the second I upload them from my computer. I post it up there with a 3-day delay for the public to see it. So you get to see it literally the second it encodes. Sometimes you'll be able to hang on to an episode and see it 3 days before everybody else, or you will get to see it at least a few hours before everybody else. So you get the preview for there. If I waited a really long time to post an episode, it's really quick. So as soon as it encodes, I push it out there because I'm trying to get the general audience out there. There's no way that I know of to give anyone a secret podcast link. So it's only going to be video, unfortunately, because there's just no methodology to create a secret podcast and only give it to a couple people. That'd be very surgical and a lot of work for me because I'd have to create 2 different podcast feeds. But there is a store with a cool two like UFO t-shirts. They're going to be season 5 t-shirts only. So as soon as the season's over, they'll disappear forever and we'll make something new for season 6. If you're trying to find episode 1 or season 1, excuse me. See, I did the episode season thing. Season 1 stuff has been pushed off on its own channel because it's all been remastered, shorter, better, volumes balanced, all that good stuff. That was the big bumper. Yeah. So anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.